perform research for standoff detection of nuclear proliferation, material that may be at risk. We also have a lot of work in my organization where we're going and securing nuclear materials and bringing those back stateside just to reduce, again, that nuclear risk. For large events, we have teams located both out of Y-12 and out of our sister site in Amarillo, Texas, called Pantex, called Radiological Assistance Program, RAP teams. So those are the teams that before an event will go, before an event will kick off, we'll deploy them. They'll have their backpacks, they'll have other counters, systems like that they'll be walking around ensuring that there's no threat.
That kind of originate out of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The Y-12 Global Security Program was actually born out of threats like that. So one of the earliest missions that we have, I'm not going to be able to talk about the locations or anything, but was utilizing the expertise that we have at Y-12, specifically associated with uranium's materials and processing, packaging, special nuclear material protection, being able to leverage all of that expertise and deploy it in other locations for other purposes. So we would go to other countries, secure that material, package it up, and bring it back to Y-12.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down with me and joining me for the podcast. Thank you for having me up here. This is quite a different environment for me. There's a lot of history here, but there's a lot of things going on that is important to our nation on a daily basis that probably a lot of people don't really realize or think about on a daily basis. So before we jump into Y-12, the complex up here, Oak Ridge, can you tell me a little bit about you and who you are and your background?
Sure. So my name is Martin Williamson. I'm the Senior Director for Global Security and Strategic Partnerships here. I'm a nuclear engineer by training. Got my PhD at UT. Go Vols! National champions in baseball. So nuclear engineer, focused on radiation detection. So after I finished my degree, I actually started out in nuclear criticality safety here. So that's making sure as we deal with fissile materials that we don't get too much co-located in a single area such that you have a nuclear criticality accident. We did have one of those here back in 1958. It's the only one that we've had at Y-12. But after going through that, I got interested more in the research side of the house. And I took a position in Washington, D.C. as a technical advisor to NA-243. That's the Office of Nuclear Verification. Focused on arms control, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to support New START arms control agreement, and the focus of the time was introducing a new set of radiation detection equipment that would be used for verification of items that were declared to be non-nuclear, treaty accountable items. So after going through that process, that really kicked off my interest in arms control and non-proliferation. I lost my mind a little bit and went to Oak Ridge National Lab, but I came back to my senses after about a year and a half, came back to where the real work is getting done here at Y-12 National Security Complex. Just a joke about Oak Ridge National Lab. There's a good friendly competition there, I would say. But came back, started an organization that was focused on defense nuclear nonproliferation and arms control. And since then, that organization has grown. And then about 2 years ago, I became the Senior Director for Global Security and Strategic Partnerships. I'm going to call it GSSP just because it's a mouthful to say that every time. But I've been really fortunate. My tenure here at Y-12 has been about 20 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and also before we get really diving into it, you get an A+ for acronyms and actually explaining the acronyms. That is one of the things, like everyone loves throwing out acronyms. I love acronyms.
USG loves.
There you go.
Loves that.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So I don't have time to explain every one of them.
It's
just part of the vernacular. Spiked my interest, the Criticality event. Can you talk to me about what that is, and then maybe a little bit of history? And then I would love to dive into the non-proliferation side and a little bit more about that. But let's talk about the criticality and what that is.
So in 1958, in our chemical processing facility, they were doing an inventory of materials. So periodically you do an inventory to make sure that you can account for all your materials. There was a misunderstanding with respect to what some material was being emptied into a 55-gallon drum. So for uranium-235, which is one of the materials that we deal with in significant quantities here at Y-12, it is a fissile material. And so what that means is if you have enough of that that's co-located, it can start a chain reaction, a nuclear chain reaction where you have an energetic release. And so that is what happened in 1958. Too much material was in that drum. There was an energetic release. If you're unlucky enough to be in an area like that, you'll see a blue flash of Cherenkov radiation. Fortunately, for a liquid type criticality event, it typically is energetic enough where it will disperse the material in the drum. But if that material is still, flowing into it, you can have a pulsed type criticality accident. So the folks, we do have alarms here at Y-12 for that kind of thing. Once the criticality event occurred, you have a release of gamma radiation as well. Those alarms pick it up, start enunciating the alarm, and people evacuate. It was a terrible, terrible accident. Like I said, it's the only one that has happened at Y-12 in its tenure. But yeah.
For my simpleton mind, I know it's probably apples and oranges.
Sure.
But if I look back at like 3 Mile Island, I know there's some differences, but are there similarities, or can you maybe explain to listeners?
There are similarities as well. So for 3 Mile Island, you have a nuclear reactor core loaded with fissile material again. So when that core is in a configuration, typically in a nuclear reactor, it's highly controlled, right? You've got control rods, you've got rods that are, fissile rods themselves. The control rods are inserted to kind of absorb that radiation, control the nuclear reaction. But for 3 Mile Island, when that core started to melt, you had that fissile material that was more densely packed, and that's really what you're concerned about in fissile, fissile controls, trying to spread it out, put material between it, put absorbers in it, that kind of thing. And so for 3 Mile Island, you had that fissile material kind of co-locating. You also have criticality accidents and that kind of thing. But you also, for that, have a terrible problem associated with the waste cleanup.
Okay. You're nuclear engineer by trade.
Yeah.
Was there a specialty in that? I mean, I'm thinking about like there's probably design elements of a nuclear reactor core versus uranium enrichment. There's different specialities going into it. What was your
radiation detection specifically?
Okay.
And so there are a couple of lanes that you can kind of choose in nuclear engineering. One of those, like you said, nuclear power is a big one, especially right now with the nuclear renaissance. There's also nuclear physics from a medical standpoint. Think of things like the gamma knife, proton therapy, that kind of stuff. Then there's the more radiation detection, fundamental research, that kind of thing. And so, I did research associated with Homeland Security. We were talking about portal monitors earlier. So there was a push back when I was in graduate school, the 2010 kind of time frame, where we were running out of helium-3. That's the primary material that's used for radiation detection at our portals. Think like large CLAN containers coming in. You have these large portal monitors that those are scanned through, looking for nuclear materials. So we were looking for an alternative to helium-3. That was my research.
The detection piece, because we also have programs like the START Treaty, or where we're overflying countries and they're overflying us, doing detection, verification based upon agreements that have been reached. I can think of, my time frame and GWAT, heavy focus after 9/11 and concern, still concerned today, a backpack, a dirty bomb, something like that might be, if you think about as the shipping containers coming in. I have no idea how many shipping containers come into the ports of the United States each and every day, but I can only imagine it's a lot.
Yes.
How do we defend? How do we detect? How does that process, how does that work?
Multiple layers of protection, I would say. And so CLAN containers, going through that portal monitor is just one phase of that early detection, early warning. Really, ideally, you're pushing that as far away from the target, the United States target, as you can do. So there's a lot of work that our organization does internationally to set up detection systems like that elsewhere to try to perform research for standoff detection of nuclear proliferation material that may be at risk. We also have a lot of work in my organization where we're going and securing nuclear materials and bringing those back stateside just to reduce, again, that nuclear risk. You mentioned specifically for large events, we have teams located both out of Y-12 and out of our sister site in Amarillo, Texas, called Pantex, called Radiological Assistance Program, RAP teams. So those are the teams that before an event will go, before an event will kick off, we'll deploy them. They'll have their backpacks, they'll have other counters, systems like that they'll be walking around, ensuring that there's no threat before the event to kind of clear the area, but then actually during the event as well. think Super Bowls, major political events, things like that, that we're deploying those teams.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
A little bit before your time, but I imagine you can speak to it. Like the fall of the Soviet Union. I know one of the major issues was the Soviet Union collapsed. And now you have all these satellite states that had weapons of mass destruction, whether it be nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons, that securing those was of criticality and extreme importance. Can you kind of talk to me? I mean, does that bleed over into today? What was that? What have you heard? What have you studied? What have you known about that time period and the threats that kind of originate out of the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, so the Y-12 Global Security Program was actually born out of threats like that. So one of the earliest missions that we have, I'm not going to be able to talk about the locations or anything, but was utilizing the expertise that we have at Y-12, specifically associated with uranium's materials and processing and packaging, special nuclear material protection, being able to leverage all of that expertise and deploy it in other locations for other purposes. So we would go to other countries, secure that material, package it up, and bring it back to Y-12. And so to date, we've done that mission in 17 countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that bridges the gap here to modern day. So Oak Ridge has a lot of history, especially when most people think of the Manhattan Project.
Right.
But I think it probably can. It is not known for specific reasons, but not thought about often. How does Oak Ridge, how does Y-12, what does the security complex here play in today's world?
Yeah, so there's a number of missions here at Y-12, and the missions have evolved since it kicked off in the Manhattan Project. But today, Y-12 and Pantex, our sister site, play a critical role in ensuring a safe, reliable, and effective nuclear deterrent. The missions that we perform at Y-12 and Pantex are somewhat different. But without going into specific details about which part of ensuring a safe, reliable, effective nuclear deterrent we have, I will tell you the NNSA is designated between Y-12 and Pantex 5 centers of excellence. So if you look at missions associated with uranium, lithium, or high explosives processes, synthesis, weaponization, those are within the Pantex and Y-12 bubble. If you look at a special nuclear material protection, that's also within our center of excellence, if you will. And then last but not least is weapons assembly and disassembly. So if you look across the nuclear security enterprise, which is within the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is within the Department of Energy, the NNSA Nuclear Security Enterprise has that mission of ensuring a safe, reliable, and effective nuclear deterrent. And so if you look at Y-12 and Pantex are managed by an M&O, management and operating contract called Consolidated Nuclear Security. Goal number 1 for that contract is that safe, reliable, effective nuclear deterrent. But if you look at the other goals for which our performance is assessed, goal 2 is reducing global nuclear threats. That's my organization. And then further than that, it's expanding that beyond NNSA to look at broader DOE, broader Department of State, Department of Defense, intelligence. That's also within my organization.
I want to dive down into the proliferation side, the security side of it as much as we can. But just painting the picture, there's obviously a very complex subject system itself, like when we talk nuclear. But when we're looking at agencies involved, I come from the military side of the standpoint. I always think nuclear in the sense of a nuclear triad, with ARC and land.
Right.
But that's just one facet of it. So you've driven down into the security and the proliferation piece. Can you talk to me a little bit about your start in proliferation, what that journey has been like so far, and some of the involvement that you've been in?
Yeah, I'll tell you maybe some of the most recent exciting work. So back at the late 2020, I was fortunate enough to be called to be part of the U.S. delegation as we were looking at the extension or modification of the New START Treaty. So the New START Treaty is the last arms control agreement that we have with Russia. It was set to expire in the beginning of 2021. And so this was during the Trump administration, and we were trying, or the intent for the administration was to expand that beyond what is right now only for strategic deployed nuclear weapons. We were looking at expanding that to all nuclear weapons. So a much broader strategic stability kind of mindset. And if something like that was to happen, then sites like Pantex and Y-12 would be involved. And so really we were fortunate enough to be, one, at the table to be able to kind of inform those negotiations, but two, be able to do research and development to concepts that were being explored from a policy perspective to test viability, to test operational impact, and so on. So from my perspective, especially looking back at recent history, that's been one of the most key as far as direct mission impact programs that we've been able to be a part of. And that continues today. So New START Treaty at that time, we weren't able to get to that point of being able to expand it to a much more comprehensive type agreement. There was a lot of interest in that time of bringing China into that discussion as well and having a trilateral type agreement. We weren't able to get there, so it was extended between the United States and Russia for 5 years. Unfortunately, Russia has now suspended their participation in New START. And so we're in a delicate place. But I do believe that both the nuclear deterrent and the global nuclear security, those are two critical parts, two sides of one coin, if you will, as far as helping ensure our global security.
The deterrence piece, why nuclear weapons? Why deterrence? Is it important? Is it effective today?
So I believe it's effective, especially as you look at the number of lives lost since the advent of nuclear weapons. Since World War II, the number of casualties per year from global conflict has decreased significantly. That doesn't mean that we don't have conflict. Obviously, we have a lot going on in the world today. But just looking at it from the perspective of the number of deaths per year, I believe that they've been very effective in reducing large-scale mass casualty type conflict.
Yeah, it seems nice to have a big stick in your closet you don't want to bring out, but
that's right.
If someone acts up, at least you know, like, hey, we don't want to go down that road.
It tempers how extreme those conflicts can go.
I know outside your purview, but since you're there, you probably can speak to it for the audience a little bit more. Yeah, obviously, Russia backed out of the START Treaty. What implications does that have? Does it have any implications? Like when we talk about these.
It does have implications. I believe as signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we have an obligation as the two leading nuclear powers to continue to reduce our nuclear stockpiles. But I think it also has broader implications from an international perspective for others that may be tempted to pursue the development of nuclear weapons. If the two leading powers are not actively working together to reduce those, the incentive for them to not necessarily pursue nuclear weapons, that calculus may change. And so concerned about it from that perspective, concerned about it just from the United States-Russia perspective as well, because while those agreements are focused on strategic deployed nuclear weapons, I think the exchange that we have of bringing Russian inspectors to United States sites, United States inspectors to Russian sites, the transparency involved, the dialogue, the continual exchange, that's healthy in a sense that's much broader than just strategic deployed nuclear weapons.
I'd like to jump up, maybe 100,000 foot view or 120,000 foot view. But how do we determine if there are rogue actors out there, rogue states that are now pursuing a nuclear path? Are there ways to figure that out?
There are ways to figure this out. And so this is an area where it's hard to talk too much from an unclassified perspective. But even in the New START Treaty, there's something called out related to national technical means, NTM. And so we do have standoff capability from a satellite perspective, of course. That's one easy way that folks can kind of, relate to. But there are other ways, not necessarily related to optical satellites. Could be radiation detection. It could be other types of sensors. But we do, as we look at Russia and China right now, so something that really pushes my organization is the nuclear posture reviews, right? And so if you look at the 2022 nuclear posture review, what it says is that by the 2030s, the United States is going to be faced with a much different landscape, different than we've ever experienced before, where we have two near-peer strategic competitors and potential adversaries in Russia and China. So as Russia is changing their stockpile to have different delivery platforms, China is increasing the number of weapons that they're intending to have, such that they're looking for parity. But that certainly, again, changes the calculus that we have. And so now more than ever, Y-12 and Pantex are being called upon to help answer questions like that on how to reduce these threats, how to identify them, characterize these threats, because of the proliferant level scale expertise that we have. We work a lot. I was joking at the beginning at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I will say they're fantastic partners with us. We work closely together with them. But when you're looking at a laboratory type capability, it's at laboratory type scales, right? They don't have the same security infrastructure that we have. They don't have the same production level capabilities that we have. And so when you're developing technologies at a low technology readiness level, it's good to do at a lab, but ultimately you have to test those on something similar to what the threat environment would look like. And so that's really where we've come into play more significantly than we have in the future recently, or more significantly than we have in the past.
So when you look out or when you go to bed at night, is there anything that keeps you awake or that you think about?
I try to keep it in perspective, right? Because I do think that there's times when if you let it all, like all the noise and things like that, I think that we live in a society now where there's so much information. There's so much information out there, and there's so little that you can actually do something directly about, right? And so I try to keep it in perspective of what can I influence, what can I directly change, right? What's within my power, and focus on that. And that's what helps me sleep at night. I think that I haven't always been in the position, obviously, that I'm in right now, and so the insights that I've had on what those threats look like previously are different than they are now. I see more than I was able to see previously. But I also believe that threats have always existed. For folks that have had the information, they've always been there, right? And so as long as we have people that are continuing to do the right thing, I do believe that we have so much of the best and brightest that are really going after these problems. We have people in policy positions that are aiming to do the right thing. That's what helps me sleep at night. There are challenges, there's no doubt, but I sleep okay.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. That's good to know.
Yeah.
What is something you think I should know or the audience should know that maybe I haven't asked that you think be important to talk about?
So I would say that if you look across the nuclear security enterprise right now, one of the threats that we talk about being most significant is human, is the expertise that we have. How are we able to solve these national level questions of what's the breakout period for a proliferant country or something like that to producing a nuclear weapon? And to be able to answer questions like that, you have to have people with hands-on experience that can actually go and assess. So we get this information in. How do we digest that? How do we use our analytical capabilities to be able to say, okay, this is what we're seeing. What does that mean for a capability? And so a lot of the statistics that you've heard thrown around is within the nuclear security enterprise, about half of the people that are practicing nonproliferation have been there less than 5 years in that role. At Y-12 specifically, it's 47% have been in their role less than 5 years. And so one of the things that we're really focused on in my organization is standing up training campuses that will allow folks to come in and do research and hands-on training with relevant equipment at relevant scales. And so one of the things I'm most excited about as we look towards the future is something called the Uranium Production and Weaponization Test Bed. That was just appropriated in the FY24 budget that was just recently approved. So what that will do is it will stand up a campus at Y-12 that will have all of the equipment through the entire life cycle of weaponization process, starting with uranium ore concentrate that you would dig out of the ground, all the way through the different conversions and processing and metal conversion to finished metal parts that would be ready for assembly. But what is unique beyond that is it's going to be at proliferant scale, at proliferant relevant equipment. So it's informed by all kinds of communities to make it really most impactful for our mission space. It's going to be a massive lift, but I believe it will directly address helping our new staff be confident in what they're chartered to be able to do, and give them the expertise that they need to have to be successful.
Someone's interested in pursuing that. How do they even get involved?
So it will be located at Y-12, right? But it will be a nuclear security enterprise-wide capability, and so we will have courses that we're training folks in, just in like familiarization type standpoint, where you might come for a week. But the intent is also to develop no-kidding experts, and so there may be like a 6-month or 1 year type curriculum where somebody would be stationed here, and so they don't have to work at Y-12. Certainly, we want to retain and attract and all that kind of thing, the best and brightest, but just kind of going through, we hire a lot of chemists, chemical engineers, nuclear engineers, electrical engineers. And so we hire a broad spectrum of disciplines coming into these mission spaces, but just raising your hand and saying that you want to be a part of this type of mission space, once you get into the nuclear security enterprise, there's a way to get engaged.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up here, is there anything that I missed, or anything you think we should talk about before we hit stop on the record?
I don't think so. The key thing I wanted to hit was UPWT. I'm most excited about that. I think that will really change the landscape for Y-12 being a major player in the nuclear security enterprise for nonproliferation.
Yeah. Well, now you got to say the acronym again.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Uranium Production and Weaponization Test Bed. Yeah.
Because you didn't say the acronym the first time. I was like, that's going to be a good one. But that's it's impressive because those are not easy acronyms.
No,
not like military.
Mouthful,
yeah.
Always.
So,
yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down today. It was very interesting to learn just a little bit about this.
Thanks so much for taking the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
16, 15,000,